Tonight, I know we've been talking about Chinese history for the last few months. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the late 2nd century revolt of a group called the Yellow Turbans. They were a group of Taoist extremists that actually were very popular with the local populace. They rapidly grew and actually were around for quite a while. They weren't the direct result of the fall of the Han, but they did lead to the circumstances that led to the fall of the Han dynasty. First of all, let me get into what the Yellow Turbans were. They actually were a group of Taoists that came out about 2nd century AD, about 3 decades before the actual rebellion actually occurred. They were founded by 3 brothers, all by the name of Zhang. They actually were known for their medical knowledge and their very organized pattern of militarism. They were concentrated around the capital of Luoyang and Chang'an in the area central of China, a very populated area. At the time of their development for a militaristic development, they actually had a formation of 3 different types of troops even before the rebellion even began. The very basic type of soldier was called the demon soldier. That sounds very imposing, it sounds very frightening, but actually that was just the standard name for the foot soldier. The reason they were called demon soldiers was because the Taoists believed that they actually had demons that they had to work out of them. Not in the sense of Western demons, but actually kind of like sins that we had to purge from ourselves. That's why they were called demon soldiers. Above that rank was actually called the libationers. The libationers had actually purged their demons. They had been advanced beyond that point where they no longer had those demons that were holding them back. And what was important about this was the Taoists at the time believed that healing came from purging your sins. If you didn't have a belief in Taoism, or you didn't have a belief that you were free of sin, that's why you were sick. So the concept of health actually came from purging yourself of those sins. So if you were able to purge yourself from those sins, you could take the next step into the religion, which was libation. Libation means providing for something, like liquids. Libationers actually provided medicinal herbs to people that came. So this was kind of a next tier group that came above the demon soldiers. Next came the licentious. Licentious were actually above the libationers. They were involved with the day-to-day operations of the rituals. They were very, very powerful in the group. They would be kind of considered what the officers would be in a military structure. All these people that came around in this group were actually in a militaristic style of operation. So it wasn't just a bunch of peasants that were hanging out. These were actually a group of highly trained military officials, military groups. They were very well organized. They actually spread out in the 8 provinces around the capital of Luoyang. At the time of the revolt in 184, they were able to summon up 360,000 troops. That's in the first day. That's before the movement became extremely popular. And you wonder how this actually occurred so quickly. It was because the brothers were actually involved in a lot of charitable work. They actually did a bunch of pro bono work that was involved in healing. So word of mouth spread. There was a lot of discontent going on at that time. There was a 10-year period in the 170s leading up to 184 where there were droughts, there were a series of floods, and there was famine. So all these factors came in, and people were starting to get distrustful. And in the Chinese Empire you had something called the Mandate of Heaven, which actually the emperor's powers were given to him by heaven and not just a man-made decree. So when things started going wrong in a country, that's when things started going downhill for the emperor, because the people started viewing the emperor as not having that mandate anymore. So in this environment of distrust toward the emperor, there's a lot of different things that were happening that kind of pointed toward these omens. Things like a woman actually giving birth to a deformed child, a monstrous child. This was viewed as a dire omen that something was not going right. Another problem with this was the empire had a very slow reaction time to dealing with these problems. Normally if a flood occurred or a drought occurred or famine occurred, the empire was very well organized at this time, but in this particular time period, the emperor was very ineffective. He didn't take a direct approach to dealing with the problems. So because of that, the eunuchs were in control, and they just didn't do the job that was needed. So the people were left out in the cold. They had to rely on groups like the Yellow Turban, what would become the Yellow Turban movement, which was actually called the Way of Peace movement, which was this Taoist group that the Zhang brothers actually formed. And they saw the discontent, and they were advocating that the mandate was lost. So this was a religious movement, not just a political movement. And it was very, very charismatic around this group of three brothers. One of the key things that needs to be discussed about this is the fact that the rebellion just didn't get put down in the early stages. This was such a popular movement that it actually lasted until 205 AD, nearly 20 years after the rebellion actually started. A lot of it had to do because it was so spread out, there was a lot of people involved in it, and when they put down one rebellion, they had another group that they had to deal with. This actually presented some logistical problems to the empire. The emperor was warned initially about the consequences of not dealing with this rebellion when it popped up. And because of that, he actually didn't take it to heart. He looked at it and said, it'll deal with itself. It's not that big of a deal. And then it turned out to be a very big deal when 360,000 people popped up. So he sent out a general named Zhu Jun, who actually battled the Yellow Turbans with mixed success for about 6 months. But he actually suffered a severe defeat at the Battle of Yingchuan, which actually made the emperor realize he had made a fatal mistake. So, after this defeat, he restructured his organization of